I never thought he would actually do something like this. Not Daniel. Not my husband, the man who spent the last 10 years of his life devoted to me, worshipping the ground I walked on, putting me first even when I didn't deserve it. But here I was, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers turned white, my mother standing beside me with her mouth slightly open, horror washing over her features as we listened to the voicemail one more time. His voice was calm. Too calm. That was what scared me the most. You made your choice. I just made mine. That was it. That was all he said before the message cut off. I felt sick. I could still hear the echoes of our laughter from just a few days ago, the excitement in my mother's voice when she suggested we take this trip. Just the two of us without Daniel. She had been hinting at it for weeks, whispering in my ear about how a little space would do me good, how Daniel had become too clingy, how a woman needs freedom sometimes, sweetheart. And maybe she was right. Or at least that's what I told myself when I agreed. At first the idea seemed harmless. A simple trip. A getaway. A break from the routine. Daniel didn't even seem that upset when I brought it up. Just a quiet nod and a small smile. Of course go, he said. You and your mom should spend some time together. So why did it feel like a mistake now? My mother was the one who suggested we leave him there. She acted like it was a joke at first, laughing over dinner, nudging my arm playfully. We should just leave him, she had said. Run off, have some fun. He'll be fine. He always is. I laughed with her. I laughed because I knew she wasn't really joking. And when the moment came, when the flight was booked, when our bags were packed, when we were standing at the airport without him, I did nothing to stop it. I ignored the gnawing feeling in my stomach, the way my hands shook when I powered my phone down just before boarding. I didn't want to see his calls, didn't want to hear his voice in that quiet, broken way that made me feel guilty. I had convinced myself I deserved this. But now, standing in front of my own house, I realized I had made a terrible, terrible mistake. The locks were changed. The curtains were drawn. The place looked deserted, lifeless, like no one had lived here for months. It didn't make sense. Daniel was supposed to be in another country. He had no way of getting back before us. And yet he had been here. I could feel it. He had been waiting. Try your key, my mother whispered, but I already knew it wouldn't work. I tried anyway, my hands trembling as I shoved it into the lock. Nothing. Panic surged through me, a cold realization sinking in. He had planned this. He knew. I grabbed my phone, my breath coming fast. I dialed him. The ringing felt endless, each second stretching longer than the last, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. When he finally picked up, he didn't say anything at first. Just silence. Then the sound of something clinking against glass, like he was having a drink, completely at ease. I swallowed hard. Daniel, I said, my voice shaking. How could you do this to us? He let out a soft chuckle. You should have thought about that before you left me. The line went dead and I stood there, staring at my phone like it had betrayed me. The call was dead, the screen dark, and my fingers shook as I gripped it tighter. My mother was still jiggling the doorknob like somehow, some way it would magically open if she just tried hard enough. But we both knew the truth now. Daniel had locked us out. He had changed the locks, shut the blinds, erased every trace of our life inside that house. I turned to my mother, my breath coming in quick, sharp gasps. What do we do? She was fuming. Her lips were drawn into a tight line, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palm. Call him back, she snapped. Tell him we're calling the police. This is illegal. He can't just lock you out of your own home. But the way she said it, the way her voice wavered just slightly, told me she knew this wasn't going to be that easy. Daniel wasn't stupid. I dialed again. It went straight to voicemail. He turned off his phone, I muttered, panic creeping up my throat. This is ridiculous, my mother hissed. He's acting like a child. If he thinks this little tantrum is going to win you back, he's delusional. Come on, we'll go to a hotel for the night. We'll get the lawyer involved first thing in the morning. I should have listened. I should have turned around, walked away, pretended I wasn't seconds away from breaking down in the middle of my front porch. But instead I stepped back from the door and looked around the house, my mind racing. He had to have left something, some clue as to what he was thinking. And then I saw it. A small white envelope taped to the garage door. I rushed toward it before my mother could stop me, ripping it free with trembling hands. My name was written on the front in Daniel's familiar handwriting, neat and steady. No anger, no messiness, just cold, calculated control. I swallowed hard and pulled the letter out. You left me behind, so I did the same. You don't live here anymore. The words hit me like a slap to the face. My knees buckled and I had to grab onto the side of the garage to keep myself upright. My mother snatched the letter from my hands, her eyes scanning it furiously. That son of a... She crumpled it up and threw it onto the ground. He thinks he can just erase you? Pretend you don't exist? Oh, he is going to regret this. But I barely heard her. My ears were ringing. I don't live here anymore. I thought about the past few days, about how easily I had gotten on that plane, how I had ignored the guilt clawing at my stomach. I thought about Daniel's voice before I left, calm, too calm. As he told me to enjoy my trip. Had he already planned this? Had he already known? I turned and pressed my forehead against the garage door, trying to breathe, trying to think. But all I could see was the house I had called home, staring back at me like a stranger. I don't live here anymore. The words kept repeating in my head, over and over, like a taunt, like a punishment. The house in front of me, the one I had decorated for Christmas every year, the one where Daniel and I had fought and laughed and made up, the one where I had stood at the door smiling as he walked inside after work, was no longer mine. It belonged to him now. Or maybe it never really belonged to me at all. My mother was pacing, furious. He thinks this is over just because he locked a few doors? She spat. Please. We'll go to a lawyer in the morning, and this will all be sorted out. He's a fool if he thinks he can just throw you out of your own home. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this was just Daniel acting out, that he was trying to scare me, to make me feel bad, to teach me some kind of lesson for leaving him behind. That I could fix this. That we could fix this. But I knew my husband. And this wasn't a tantrum. This was calculated. This was final. I turned around and walked down the driveway, away from the house, away from the life I had just been ripped from. I heard my mother following me, still muttering under her breath about lawyers and revenge and how men were weak and pathetic when they didn't get their way. I wasn't listening. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found his name again. Daniel. I hit the call button, my heartbeat slamming against my ribs. Straight to voicemail. I clenched my jaw. Daniel, I said, my voice shaking. I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is cruel. I get that you're mad, but locking me out of my own house? Really? This isn't you. I hesitated, swallowing hard. Just call me back. Please. I hung up before my voice could break. My mother scoffed. Begging isn't a good look, sweetheart. I ignored her, staring down at my phone, waiting, hoping. No call. No message. Nothing. The realization started to sink in. I had underestimated him. For years, Daniel had been the one who never fought back, the one who always forgave, the one who let things slide. He let me win the arguments, let me come and go as I pleased, let me make the decisions. Even when I saw his disappointment, even when I knew I was hurting him, he never punished me for it. But this time he did. I just never thought it would be like this. A cold wind hit me and I shivered. Let's just go, I muttered, shoving my phone into my pocket. My mother sighed but nodded. We'll get a hotel. First thing in the morning we'll make some calls. I have a friend whose husband is a divorce attorney. He'll make sure you get everything. Everything. That word made my stomach turn. Because now, for the first time, I realized that Daniel had already taken something from me. Something I hadn't even realized I still wanted. The hotel room was quiet, but my mind wasn't. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone, willing it to light up with Daniel's name. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, pressing down on my chest. He wasn't calling. He wasn't texting. He was done. I should have known. My mother was on the other bed, furiously typing away on her tablet. I just emailed Richard, she said, her voice tight with irritation. He's the best divorce attorney in town. We'll see how smug Daniel is when he gets served. I barely nodded. The idea of going straight to a lawyer made my skin crawl. Divorce. Was that what this was? Just like that? I had left for a trip, and now I was coming back to. Nothing? Didn't feel real. I rubbed my temples. Mom. Maybe I should just talk to him. She let out an exasperated sigh, setting her tablet down. Talk to him? Sweetheart, he just locked you out of your own house. Changed the locks. Humiliated you. That is not a man who wants to talk. But I stopped myself. What was I even trying to say? That he wouldn't do this? That this wasn't him? That he still loved me somewhere beneath all of this? Because the truth was, I wasn't sure anymore. My mother scoffed at my hesitation. He's acting like a child. He wants you to beg, to grovel. And you know what? Maybe you should let him think he's won for a little while. Let him feel like he's in control. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with confidence. Then, when he least expects it, you take everything. Her words made my stomach twist. I had heard them before. I had grown up hearing them. Watching her destroy my father in their divorce, taking him for everything he had, never showing an ounce of regret. And I had sworn I would never be like her. And yet here I was. I swallowed hard. I don't think I want it to go that far. She rolled her eyes. You're being naive, darling. This is already war. He made it war the second he locked that door behind him. I clenched my jaw. Was she right? Was this war? Or was this just Daniel finally standing up for himself? I didn't know. And that terrified me. I stood up abruptly, grabbing my coat. I need some air. She sighed but waved me off. Fine. Just don't do anything stupid. I ignored her, stepping out into the cool night air, my mind racing. I pulled my phone out, staring at Daniel's contact again. I knew he wouldn't answer, but I had to try. The phone rang once. Twice. Straight to voicemail. I closed my eyes, my breath shaky. And then I did something I never thought I would do. I texted him. Daniel, please, just tell me where you are. I just want to talk. I stared at the message for a long moment before finally hitting send. And then I waited. A minute passed. Then 2. Then 5. And finally my phone vibrated in my hand. A reply. There's nothing to talk about, Lauren. You made your choice. Now live with it. I felt the world tilt beneath me. Because for the first time I realized I wasn't the one in control anymore. I stared at his message, the weight of his words settling into my bones. You made your choice. Now live with it. My hands trembled as I clutched my phone, rereading it over and over, searching for something, anything, that would tell me he wasn't serious, that there was still a way back. But there was nothing. Just cold finality. My breathing hitched, and for the first time since I landed back home, I felt the reality of it crush me. Daniel was done. He wasn't waiting for me to apologize. He wasn't going to beg me to come back. He had shut the door, locked it, and thrown away the key. And worst of all, I had handed him the match to burn it all down. My mother's voice pulled me out of my daze. She was standing in the doorway of the hotel room, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Did he respond? She asked, but I knew she already knew the answer. I turned my phone toward her and she scoffed. Good. Let him sit in his anger. The moment you act desperate, you lose. I exhaled sharply, shoving my phone into my pocket. Mom, this isn't a game. She raised an eyebrow. Oh, but it is. And right now you're losing. Losing. The word made my stomach turn. For years, Daniel and I had never been about winning or losing. He let me have my way more often than not, always the first to apologize, always the one to smooth things over. And I let him. I let him because I thought he always would. I never thought he'd be capable of this, of walking away without looking back. But now I saw it clearly. He had been planning this. The calm way he told me to enjoy my trip, the way he let me leave without a fight. He knew. A lump formed in my throat as I thought back to the last time I saw him, standing in the doorway watching me pack my bags. You sure you don't mind? I had asked, my voice laced with something that felt like guilt but wasn't strong enough to make me stop. Go, he had said, smiling, but there had been something in his eyes, something I ignored. And now that look made sense. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't anger. It was acceptance. He had already let me go before I even left. I turned away from my mother, rubbing my temples. I just need to think. She sighed dramatically. Thinking won't get your house back. I ignored her, walking out of the room and into the dimly lit hallway of the hotel. I needed space. I needed to breathe. I needed to figure out what the hell I was going to do. Because if Daniel was serious, if he was really done, then I had just lost everything. And the worst part? I wasn't even sure if I deserved to get it back. The night air did nothing to clear my head. I walked aimlessly, my fingers tightening around my phone, waiting for a message that would never come. Daniel had always been the soft one, the forgiving one, the one who let me push and push without ever pushing back. Until now. Now he wasn't just pushing back, he had erased me. The house, the life we built, the home we shared, it was all gone, like I had never belonged there in the first place. And maybe, just maybe, I never really did. I don't know how long I wandered before I found myself standing outside a small 24-hour diner. I wasn't hungry, but my legs felt weak, and I needed to sit down. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside, the warm scent of coffee and grease wrapping around me. A few people were scattered across the booths, truckers and night owls, lost in their own little worlds. I slid into a booth near the window, pressing my fingers against my temples, willing the pounding in my head to stop. The waitress, a tired-looking woman with fading red hair, approached with a notepad. "Coffee?" she asked, not bothering with pleasantries. I nodded. "Yeah, thanks." As she walked away, my phone buzzed. My breath caught as I snatched it up, my heart pounding. But it wasn't Daniel. It was my mother. "Where are you? Call me back." I exhaled sharply, rubbing my thumb over the screen. I didn't want to talk to her. Didn't want to hear another lecture about how I needed to play this right. This wasn't a game. This was my life, and I was losing it. The waitress returned, setting the steaming mug in front of me before walking off without another word. I stared into the dark liquid, my mind racing. I needed to talk to Daniel. Not to beg, not to fight, but to understand. If this was really the end, if I had really lost him, then I needed to hear it from him one last time. My fingers trembled as I pulled up his contact. I hesitated. He wouldn't answer. He hadn't answered before. But what if he did? What if there was still a chance? I hit the call button, pressing the phone to my ear. 1 ring. 2. 3. Voicemail. Again. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Please. Just talk to me. Just tell me what I'm supposed to do." I ended the call, setting the phone down on the table, my pulse thundering in my ears. And then, just as I was about to give up, my phone lit up. A message from Daniel. My breath hitched as I opened it, my fingers shaking. "There's nothing left to say, Lauren. Go back to your mother. That's where you always wanted to be." My chest tightened, a sharp pain blooming deep inside me. Because for the first time since this all began, I realized something terrifying. He wasn't just angry. He wasn't just hurt. He meant it. I stared at the screen, rereading Daniel's message so many times the words blurred together. Go back to your mother. That's where you always wanted to be. It was final. A cold, emotionless dismissal. Like I was nothing more than a passing inconvenience. Like I had never mattered at all. The coffee in front of me had gone cold, untouched. The soft hum of conversation in the diner faded into background noise, my world shrinking down to the phone in my shaking hands. I wanted to scream at him, to demand that he talk to me, to remind him of everything we had been before this. But how could I, when I had been the one to walk away first? I left him. And now he was leaving me. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to type out something, anything, that might break through his walls. But nothing felt right. Nothing felt like enough. What could I even say? That I was sorry? That I never meant for it to come to this? That I thought he'd always be there, waiting no matter how much space I took for myself? Because that was the truth, wasn't it? I never thought he'd be the one to shut the door. A sharp knock against my table made me jump, snapping me out of my spiraling thoughts. I looked up to see my mother standing there, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. So this is where you ran off to? I sighed, shoving my phone onto the table. How did you find me? She slid into the seat across from me, setting her purse down with a heavy thud. Please. You've been predictable since you were a teenager. Whenever things don't go your way, you disappear somewhere quiet until you convince yourself you're the victim. Her words stung, but I didn't have the energy to fight her. I just looked down at my hands, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. He won't talk to me, I muttered. She snorted. Of course he won't. He's punishing you, sweetheart. You hurt his ego, so now he wants to make you feel powerless. I shook my head. No. This is different. He's never been like this before. That's because you never gave him a reason to be. I looked up sharply, meeting her gaze. There was no sympathy in her eyes, no warmth, just the same ruthless practicality she had always carried. My mother never believed in regret. She believed in control and winning, in never letting anyone see you sweat. I used to admire that about her. Now I wasn't so sure. She leaned forward, tapping her manicured nails against the table. Listen to me, Lauren. You have two choices. You can sit here sulking waiting for him to come crawling back, which he won't, by the way, or you can take back what's yours. I swallowed hard. And how do I do that? Her lips curved into a smirk, as if she had been waiting for me to ask. Simple. We go to the lawyer first thing in the morning. We file for divorce and we make sure you walk away with everything. The house, the assets, hell, even the damn dog if you want it. We make sure he regrets ever thinking he could do this to you. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The house. I thought about standing in front of it just hours ago, feeling like an outsider looking in on my own life. Could I really take it back? Force my way in? Win through legal technicalities and paperwork? Felt wrong. But wasn't that what Daniel had done to me? He locked me out, cut me off, erased me from our life without so much as a conversation. Maybe this was the only way. Maybe this was the only move I had left. I exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the table. Okay. My mother smiled. That's my girl. But as I sat there, my heart still hammering in my chest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly, terribly wrong. The next morning I woke to the sound of my mother on the phone, her voice sharp and businesslike. Yes, Richard, first thing. We need to move quickly. A pause. I don't care if he changed the locks. The house is still legally half hers, and we're not letting him get away with this. I rubbed my temples, exhaustion sinking into my bones. I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes I saw Daniel's face. Not angry, not desperate, just done. That hurt more than anything. I sat up slowly, reaching for my phone. Still no messages. No calls. Nothing. He really was gone. By the time we arrived at Richard's office, I felt like I was floating through someone else's life. My mother led the conversation, talking about assets, legal action, and property claims while I sat there, nodding in all the right places. I barely heard any of it. All I could think about was how it had come to this, how I had let it come to this. When Richard finally turned to me directly, his gaze was firm but patient. Lauren, I need to ask, are you absolutely sure you want to go through with this? I opened my mouth, ready to say yes, ready to fight back. But before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A message. From Daniel. Don't bother. My blood ran cold. I stared at the screen, my heart slamming against my ribs. My mother leaned over, trying to read it, but I pulled it away before she could. Richard frowned. Everything okay? I forced a tight smile. Yeah, fine. But my hands were trembling. I needed to talk to him. Alone. Now. Without another word, I stood up, grabbed my purse, and walked out of the office. My mother called after me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I dialed Daniel's number as I stepped out onto the busy sidewalk, my pulse roaring in my ears. Voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. I clenched my teeth, rage bubbling to the surface. He wanted to ignore me? Fine. But he was going to hear me whether he liked it or not. I started typing. Daniel, you don't get to do this. You don't get to walk away like I never mattered. You don't get to just erase me. We need to talk. I hit send, breathing heavily, waiting, hoping. 3 dots appeared. My stomach flipped. He was typing. And then the message came through. You're right. We do need to talk. Come to the house. I froze. The house. The place he had locked me out of. Something about it felt off. A trap. A test. A final nail in the coffin. But I had no choice. I needed answers. And I was going to get them. I stood outside the house, my heart hammering against my ribs, my breath uneven. The air felt thick, pressing down on me as if the universe itself was telling me to turn around. But I couldn't. Not now. Daniel had called me here. He wanted to talk. And after everything, after the silence, the locked doors, the messages that felt more like slaps to the face, I needed to hear his voice again. I reached for the doorknob out of habit, but it didn't budge. Locked. Of course. A lump formed in my throat as I raised my hand and knocked. Hard. A long pause. Then footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. The door swung open and there he was. Daniel. He looked different. Not disheveled, not broken. Not like a man who had spent the past few days drowning in misery. He was calm. Too calm. He looked at me the way someone looks at a stranger. Cold. Detached. Like he had already decided how this conversation was going to go. Lauren, he said, his voice unreadable. I swallowed hard. Can we talk? He didn't move. Didn't invite me in. Just stood there watching me. I already said everything I needed to say. I clenched my fists. No, you didn't. You locked me out of my own house and then sent me a text telling me to move on. That's not saying everything, Daniel. That's punishing me. He let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Punishing you? His jaw tensed, his grip tightening around the edge of the door. Lauren, you left me. You got on a plane with your mother, turned your phone off, and left me sitting in a hotel alone in another country. And you expected what? That I'd just wait? That I'd sit here and let you waltz back in like nothing happened? My chest tightened. I wasn't leaving you, Daniel. It was just a trip. I needed. His eyes darkened. No. Don't do that. Don't say you needed space, or that you just wanted time to think. Because we both know that's not true. I took a shaky breath. I didn't think it would hurt you like this. Of course you didn't, he muttered. Because you never think about how things affect me, Lauren. It's always been about you. Your wants. Your needs. Your mother whispering in your ear. Convincing you that you deserve more than a husband who actually gives a damn about you. I flinched. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. I spent years making excuses for you. Telling myself that you were just independent, that you needed freedom, that I was being paranoid whenever I felt you pulling away. But this. His voice dropped low and steady. This was the moment I realized I don't want to do it anymore. Something inside me cracked. So that's it? You're just done. He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at me. Really looked at me like he was searching for the woman he used to love but couldn't find her anymore. Then finally he stepped aside. Come in. I hesitated, suddenly unsure. But I couldn't walk away now. I stepped inside, my breath catching in my throat as I looked around. The house was empty. Not physically. The furniture was still here. The pictures were still on the walls. But it felt hollow, like someone had carefully stripped it of warmth, of familiarity. Like I was standing in a stranger's home. Then my eyes landed on the suitcases by the staircase. My suitcases. I turned to Daniel slowly, my pulse thundering in my ears. What is this? He crossed his arms. It's exactly what it looks like. A lump formed in my throat. You packed my things? He nodded once. I did. My stomach twisted violently. Daniel, you can't be serious. His expression didn't change. You don't live here anymore. The words hit like a punch to the gut, knocking the air from my lungs. He had said it before, in the letter taped to the garage, in the messages he sent. But hearing it like this, spoken out loud, made it real in a way that text never could. I took a shaky step toward him. You don't have to do this. He tilted his head slightly, almost like he was curious. Why? Because you suddenly decided you don't like the consequences of your own choices. I swallowed hard. Because I still love you. A flicker of something crossed his face, pain maybe, doubt, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. You have a funny way of showing it, he said quietly. I felt my mother's voice in my head, telling me to fight, to demand what was mine. But for the first time in my life, I didn't want to listen to her. I just wanted Daniel to look at me the way he used to see something in me worth saving. Daniel, please, I whispered. We can fix this. His lips parted slightly, like he wanted to say something. But then he shook his head, almost as if he were reminding himself of something. No, Lauren. We can't. And just like that, I knew it was over. Not because I wanted it to be. Not because I was ready. But because he was. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. The silence stretched between us, heavy and unbearable. My throat was tight, my heart pounding so hard I felt it in my ears. I wanted to say something, anything, to stop what was happening, to make him change his mind, to undo the mess I had made. But Daniel just stood there, unmoving, his expression unreadable. He had packed my things. He had made up his mind. And I was losing him. I stepped closer, reaching for his hand on instinct, but he pulled away before I could touch him. The rejection stung more than I expected, sharp and undeniable. "Daniel, please," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "We can fix this." He let out a breath, slow and measured, like he was forcing himself to stay calm. "Lauren, there is no we anymore. You left and I—" He stopped himself, his jaw tightening. "I can't do this again." Again. The word felt like a slap. I wanted to argue, to tell him that this was different, that I hadn't actually done anything wrong, that it was just a trip, just time away. But that wasn't the truth, was it? I had made him feel like an afterthought, like he wasn't worth staying for. And now he was making sure I knew exactly how that felt. I forced myself to breathe. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Daniel shook his head, laughing bitterly. "Yeah? Well, maybe you should have thought about that before you walked away." I didn't. I stopped myself because I knew whatever excuse I gave, he wouldn't accept it. And deep down I wasn't sure I even believed it myself. He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "You know what the worst part is, Lauren? It's not that you left. It's not even that you listened to your mother more than you ever listened to me. It's that you thought I'd just be here, waiting, like I always am." I swallowed hard. "I never meant to hurt you." His eyes met mine, dark and tired. "That doesn't change the fact that you did." The weight of his words settled over me, crushing and suffocating. This wasn't just anger. This wasn't him lashing out. This was something deeper. This was a man who had finally run out of patience. I turned toward the suitcases again, my fingers tightening around the handle of one. It was so final, so absolute. "So that's it." My voice cracked. "You're just kicking me out?" Daniel exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples like he was exhausted. "You keep saying that like you don't understand what's happening here. I'm not kicking you out, Lauren. You left. I'm just making it official." I felt the tears threatening to rise, but I swallowed them down. I wouldn't cry in front of him. Not now. Not when I had done this to myself. I looked around the house, my gaze lingering on the framed pictures on the wall, the couch where we used to curl up together, the kitchen where we had spent so many late nights talking about everything and nothing. It was still our home, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. Because it wasn't. I turned back to Daniel, my hands trembling at my sides. "And if I walk out that door, that's it? You're done." His expression didn't change. "I was done the moment you got on that plane." The words hit me like a gut punch, stealing the air from my lungs. I searched his face for something, hesitation, doubt, a flicker of the love that had once been so easy to see. But there was nothing. Just quiet, resigned certainty. I nodded slowly, forcing myself to accept what I had been denying this whole time. I had lost him, and there was no getting him back. I reached for the handle of my suitcase, my grip tightening as I turned toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last, my body screaming at me to stop, to turn around, to say something that would make him change his mind. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because the truth was, he had already made his choice. And now I had to live with mine. The door clicked shut behind me, the finality of it echoing in my ears. The night air was cold against my skin, but I barely felt it. My hands gripped the suitcase handle so tightly my knuckles turned white, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I had always thought deep down that no matter how much distance I put between us, Daniel would be there, waiting, loving me. But now I knew the truth. I had walked away one too many times. And this time he hadn't followed. I didn't know how long I stood there, frozen on the front porch, staring at the empty driveway as if it held the answers to what the hell I was supposed to do next. My mother's car was parked at the curb, her impatient silhouette visible through the windshield. She was waiting, no doubt ready to launch into a speech about how this was for the best, about how I could use the situation to my advantage, about how Daniel had been weak for letting his emotions control him. But for once I didn't want to hear it. I dragged my suitcase down the steps, my movements mechanical. With every step away from the house, my chest tightened. This was it. The moment my life truly split in two, the life I had with Daniel and the one I had just walked into. I reached the car, yanking the door open and sliding into the passenger seat. My mother didn't speak right away. She just tapped her nails against the steering wheel, watching me carefully. "Well," she finally said, her tone clipped. "That was humiliating." I turned my head sharply, staring at her in disbelief. "Excuse me." She let out a huff, shaking her head. "Lauren, you let him take the power. You should have walked in there with your head high, demanded your place back, and made it clear that you weren't going to be tossed aside like some disposable thing. Instead, you let him win." I let out a bitter laugh, leaning my head against the seat. "Mom, this wasn't a game. There was nothing to win." She scoffed. "Everything is a game, sweetheart. And you played it wrong." I closed my eyes, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me. I didn't have the energy to argue with her, to explain that this wasn't about power or control, that for once in my life, I had finally seen things clearly. Daniel hadn't won. He had just finally decided he deserved better than waiting around for me to figure out if I loved him enough to stay. And the worst part? I wasn't even sure I blamed him. "Let's just go," I muttered. My mother sighed but didn't argue. She shifted the car into drive, pulling away from the house without another word. I kept my gaze on the rearview mirror, watching as the house faded into the darkness, as the last piece of the life I had built with Daniel disappeared from view. And then just like that it was gone. The hotel room felt colder than before, emptier, like even the walls knew I didn't belong there. My suitcase sat untouched by the door, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. Unpacking felt too much like accepting that this was real, that I no longer had a home, that I had nowhere to go. I sat on the bed staring at my phone, the screen still dark. No messages. No missed calls. Nothing. I had expected anger. I had expected an argument. I had even expected him to give in at the last moment to tell me to stay. But I hadn't expected silence. And somehow that was worse. I pressed my fingers against my temple, trying to make sense of the past few days. How had it unraveled so quickly? One moment I had everything. A home. A husband who loved me. Stability. And now? Now I had a suitcase and a hotel key. I exhaled sharply, my chest aching. I reached for my phone, my thumb hovering over Daniel's name. I wanted to text him. I wanted to call him. I wanted to say something even if I didn't know what. But I didn't. Because I knew deep down he wouldn't answer. Instead, I did the only thing I could do. I placed my phone face down on the nightstand, curled up on the bed and closed my eyes. And for the first time since this all started, I let myself cry.